Welcome back to another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Richard Thompson, and today is a bit of a solo episode. The last couple of weeks has got me thinking that business success really does require a professional athlete approach. And so looking back in the memory bank when I was a professional athlete, I've come up with, a small episode about what professional sport has really taught me. I think the takeaways can be implemented into business in all industries. So hopefully there's something in it for everyone. Let's get into it. It has been more than 3 years since I was a professional athlete. I haven't swum a lap or ridden a bike in that time, and strangely, I don't really miss either of them. What I do miss, or perhaps what I've only recently come to appreciate, is the environment that surrounded professional sport. The discipline of it, the clarity, the constant process of preparing, performing, reviewing, and improving. Ultra-distance triathlon teaches you a lot of things, but one of the biggest is how much time you spend inside your own head. When you're training 35 to 40 hours a week, you spend a huge amount of that time alone. Sometimes you have to find a flow state where everything feels effortless and your mind goes quiet. God, I love those moments. More often, though, you're simply moving forward while thinking about whatever your brain decides to serve up for that day. You work through problems with the world, problems with other people, and problems with yourself. There is something quite haunting, though, about being 6 or 7 hours into a solo bike ride when you aren't really on speaking terms with yourself. There's nowhere to go and very little to hide behind. And eventually, you have to sit with whatever is going on inside of you. Over time, you get better at it. You learn to hold space for discomfort instead of immediately trying to escape it. You learn to be a bit gentler with yourself. You learn that not every bad thought needs to become a bad day. And you learn that resilience is less about pretending everything is fine and more about remaining useful when it isn't. I didn't appreciate that at the time, how much that would carry into business, into life generally. When I moved from professional sport into business, I knew that some of the predisposed habits would be useful. I've always been motivated by big goals. I like imagining something that feels difficult, perhaps slightly unreasonable, definitely unachievable by myself, and certainly impossible to achieve by myself. I like building a team around that idea, getting people to believe in it, and then applying a fairly sickening amount of work towards making that happening. That part felt really familiar. In sport, every world championship has an opportunity to refine that process. You set the goal, you assemble the team, you do that sickening work ethic, you race, you review the outcome, look at the data, and ask the hard questions, and go again. There's very little sentimentality around that process. If something wasn't working, you changed it. If something was working, you tried to understand why. If the result wasn't good enough, you didn't need to invent a story about it. The clock had already told you. Business is far less clear. There is no stopwatch telling you whether your last 6 months were genuinely productive. There is no finish line at the end of the financial year. There is no world championship date that forces everything into that perspective. And because of that, it becomes remarkably easy to confuse being busy with getting better. That has probably been one of the biggest realizations for me over the last few years. The ambition carried across from sport, the work ethic carried across, the desire to build a great team carried across, but some of the disciplines around performance became less sharp. There was no coach standing on pool deck watching the small things, no training plan forcing a deliberate cycle of stress and recovery, no regular tests telling you whether all the effort was actually producing improvement. The longer I've spent in business, the more I've come to believe that high performance in business requires much more of a professional athlete mentality than most of us realize. Not because business is the same as sport, it obviously isn't, but because sustained performance has similar foundations. And I want to share a few of those foundations today. Number one, competition creates the standard. The first is that you have to accept that you are competing. That sounds obvious, but I don't mean it in an aggressive sense. Professional athletes understand that there are other people chasing the same outcome, that are trying to steal your dream away from you. Someone else is training, someone else is improving, someone else is studying where they are weak and looking for an advantage. Business works the same way. Whatever industry you're in, someone else is trying to serve the same client, attract the same people, build a better product, create a stronger brand, or I guess find a more efficient way of doing the work. That doesn't mean you should obsess over competitors. I think you can just equally be dangerous. I think that can be equally dangerous. If you spend all your time looking sideways, you eventually lose sight of what you're trying to build going forward. But competition does create a useful standard. It forces you to ask whether you are actually improving. Are we serving clients better than we were a year ago? Are we becoming faster? Are we attracting better people? Are we keeping great people? Are we building something meaningfully different, or are we simply repeating what has worked before? In pro sport, standing still means moving backwards because the people around you do not stop improving. Business is no different. Number 2, the idea is that your body is part of the business. The second lesson is one I think business leaders often understand intellectually, but fail to live by. Your body is the instrument through which your performance happens. In sport, this is plainly obvious. If you are sleep deprived, underfueled, injured, dehydrated, or exhausted, your performance suffers. Nobody finds that controversial. Nobody praises an elite athlete for getting only 4 hours of sleep and then turning up to the race. Yet in business, some of the behaviors we celebrate would be considered completely irresponsible in professional sport. We glorify being consistently available. We confuse exhaustion with commitment. We treat sleep deprivation as a sign that someone must be important or working harder than anyone else. But your judgment still comes from the same biological system. So does your patience, your creativity, your ability to listen, your emotional regulation, and thereby the emotional safety in your organization. Your capacity to deal with pressure, your ability to make a difficult decision after a long day without letting fatigue make the decision for you. And the micro changes of that are immense. All of the high quality work that genuinely moves a business sits downstream from your physical and cognitive state. There are plenty of tasks in business where being at 70% probably doesn't matter too much. You can clear an inbox while tired. You can sit through a routine meeting. You can deal with the administration that you have to do. But there are also moments that materially change the direction of a company. Hiring someone important, losing someone important, negotiating a major deal, responding to a client crisis, deciding where to invest or stop investing. Walking into a room where the people around you need confidence and clarity from you. Your condition in those moments matters way more than you think. That has changed the way I think about sleep, exercise, nutrition, and recovery. I don't see them as lifestyle choices separate from work. I increasingly see them as part of an infrastructure of good work. The question is not simply how much can I fit into this week? It is also what condition do I need to be in to do the important work well this week? Hey guys, just popping in quickly to say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, it would mean a lot if you take a second to follow the show, leave a like or review, and share it with a friend. That support genuinely helps us grow and keep bringing you more great conversations every single week. All right, let's get back into it. Number 3, recovery has to be deliberate. The recovery piece is super critical. I think in my view is probably one of the most overlooked parts of business performance. Business is quintessential an endurance event with no natural finish line. That makes it quite dangerous for ambitious people. In sport, there are defined periods. You build towards something, you train hard, you recover, you train again, you recover, you taper, then you race. And then after the race, you recover for a while. Then you begin again. There is a rhythm to it, a cyclical rhythm. Business does not give you that rhythm unless you create it for yourself. There is always another client, another opportunity, another problem, God knows, another email, another financial year, another target. There's always going to be that extra work that could justify just working a little bit longer. If you wait for business to tell you when it's time to recover, you may be waiting for a very long time, and it may be too late. As an athlete, recovery was planned before you were exhausted. That is the important point. You don't wait until you're injured to decide that training load might matter. You don't wait until your body has completely broke down before taking an easy day. Recovery was part of the program because recovery was part of the performance. I think we need to become much more deliberate about that in business. There is the micro recovery that happens across each day and during the week. Sleep, exercise, a walk, time away from your phone, an evening where your mind is not still sitting in the office, a weekend that is occasionally allowed to remain a weekend. And I'm talking directly into a mirror when I'm saying this. Then there is a macro recovery, proper holidays, time away from the business, periods where you can deliberately lower the intensity, time to think rather than simply execute. None of this means I have suddenly become an advocate for avoiding hard work. It's quite the opposite. I still believe meaningful outcomes often require periods of enormous effort. There are times in business when an opportunity appears and you need to attack it. There are times where things go wrong and everyone needs to lift. There will be times when building something worthwhile simply requires more time from you. Sport is exactly the same, but athletes understand the difference between a hard training block and trying to train at maximum intensity indefinitely. One creates adaptation, the other eventually breaks you. And I think it is exactly the same in business. The aim is not perfect balance every day. I'm not sure that's realistic for anyone in trying to build something ambitious. The aim is sustainability over the season. You need to know when you are pushing hard, why you are doing it, and when you're going to recover from it. Recovery should not be the prize you give yourself after burning out. It should be one of those things that stops you from burning out in the first place. Number 4, learn to perform under pressure. The final part of the athlete mentality is learning to perform under pressure. Professional sport happens live. You can prepare for months, but eventually the race starts. At that point, the conditions are real, the competition is real, and the clock is running. Things go wrong. There is no second chances. You might not feel the way you expect to feel. The conditions might change. Someone might race differently to what you expected. A plan that looked perfect on paper might suddenly make no sense. You have to make decisions in the moment. Business feels very similar to me. The moments that matter are rarely convenient. A major client calls with a problem. A senior person resigns. A deal starts falling apart. A mistake is made. A competitor moves. An opportunity arrives and needs response before you've had enough time to think about it. You still have to perform. And this is where preparation becomes incredibly important. Athletes spend enormous amounts of time training for moments that might last only a few hours. They rehearse, they create routines, they expose themselves to pressure, they review the outcome afterwards and try to understand what exactly happened. Businesses should do much more of this. One habit from sport that I think translates particularly well is the debrief. After a race, you would never simply say, "That felt pretty good," and then move on. You look at what happened, what worked, what didn't. Where did the plan fail? What surprised us? And what did the data say? Maybe what we would do differently next time. There shouldn't also be any surprises. There's no judgment in that process either when it's done properly. It's simply learning. And I think businesses often move too quickly from one thing to the next. A major project finishes and the next one begins, and then a difficult quarter passes and everyone's simply relieved to be through it. A great result arrives and the instinct is to celebrate it rather than understand it. It's a process of understanding what's going on, whether it's a good news day or a bad news day. There is enormous value in stopping long enough to ask why, being curious over judgment. Why did we win? Why did we lose? Why did that work so well? Why did that become unnecessarily difficult? Was that good execution, or were we just lucky? You learn far more when you are prepared to look honestly at your own performance. Perhaps the biggest thing I miss from professional sport is that the entire environment was designed around getting better. You had a coach, a program, specialist data, you had recovery dialed, you had feedback, you had this massive goal, and importantly, You had a date attached to it. It was coming at you whether you liked it or not. In business, people often have the goal, but none of the infrastructure around it. We set an ambitious revenue target or decide we want to grow or enter a new market or build a better company and then rely on a combination of motivation and hard work to get there. Sometimes that works, but it's difficult to sustain. I now know I find myself asking slightly different questions. Instead of only asking, what are we trying to achieve? I think more about what environment would make achieving it more likely? Who needs to be around us? What do we need to measure? What conversations are we avoiding? Where do we need greater discipline? Or potentially even what behaviors need to become normal. That's a really important piece. How do we act in a day-to-day basis, minute-to-minute basis to achieve what we're going to set out to achieve? And the last question is probably the most uncomfortable one. How do I personally get better? But I think that's the most important one of all. One of the dangers of leadership is that it becomes so easy to identify where everybody else could improve. Professional sport never really gave you that luxury. The stopwatch always brought the conversation back to you as the athlete. There was nowhere to hide from your own performance. You either succeeded or you didn't. Business needs some version of that too. Ambition is not enough, but I still love those big goals. That hasn't changed. I like the energy that they create. I like that they force people to think differently. I like that they expose weaknesses in the current way of doing things. It shifts perspective to be the best in the world at something, or try to be the best in the world at something. I like building a group of good people around something that initially feels difficult or impossible, and then working out together how to make it possible. But I've come to understand that ambition on its own is not enough. Ambition without structure becomes, I think, like chaos. Work ethic without recovery becomes burnout. Competition without perspective becomes unhealthily an obsession. And potentially pressure without preparation creates some pretty poor decisions. High performance requires an environment. It requires a great team. It requires clarity. It requires deliberate improvement, a healthy respect for competition. It needs physical and mental capabilities for doing the work. It requires periods of intense effort, periods where you allow that effort to be absorbed, and the humility to review what happened honestly before going again. So what I've taken with me from sport. I haven't ridden a bike or swum a lap in more than 3 years. Done a little running, but nothing serious. The scoreboard is different and the race lasts considerably longer, but the underlying principles are remarkably similar. If you want to achieve something genuinely difficult in business, you need more than a big goal and a willingness to work hard. You need to build an environment capable of carrying you there. All right, what are the 3 principles I now apply? There are 3 things. First, be deliberate about the environment around performance. Don't simply set the goal. Build the team, the standards, the feedback, and the routines required to achieve it. Second, treat your own physical and cognitive capacity as a business asset. The quality of your most important decision is directly connected to the condition in which you make it. Make sure you go to the gym. And third, learn to work in cycles. Push when it's time to push. Recover before you desperately need to. Review what happened, learn from it, and then go again. Professional sport taught me that success is rarely about one heroic effort. It is usually the result of doing the right things with the right people consistently long enough. Business, I suspect, is much the same. Until next time, peace.